completely machinima. And now for something completely machinima. And now for something completely machinima.
Hello and welcome to this month's episodes of the Completely Machinima podcast. I'm here today with Ricky Grove and Damien Valentine, and Phil is off on his hollybob somewhere nice and colourful, I hope.
I can see you scaling up that mountain behind you.
Yeah, that's Thor's hammer in the background. That's Bryce Canyon. I could have sworn I saw him when I was there too. So yeah, anyway.
Bryce Canyon is a wonderful place.
Isn't it amazing? Spectacular, yeah. I would suggest. Absolutely incredible. Indeed. Anyway, we've got some amazing films for you this month. We're going to start the month off, though, with Ricky's pick. Ricky, why don't you tell us about it?
I sure will. This is a 2009 machinima that I came across on the archive.org. Now, archive.org, again, as I've been picking from, it is a great source for finding machinima. However, you have to go through a lot of average and below average films, at least from our perspective here at Completely Machinima. But you do find these gems, and this was a film that I didn't see when it came out in 2009. And when I came across it, I was just staggered by how smart and really satirical and political the film is. Machinima is not known for producing political films, partially because the interests of gamers who make the films aren't geared towards politics. They're geared towards fun and risque and silly absurdist humor. I mean, Red versus Blue is a very interesting series, but inevitably when you come down to it, it really doesn't have much content. It's like a funny TV show that keeps playing the same joke over and over. So when I came across Welcome to the Desert of the Real, I was struck first by the title because it reminded me of, I think it was Baudrillard's book about
Simulacra.
The Desert of the Real. I thought that was pretty interesting. Or Simulacra and Simulation, which is also quoted in The Matrix, by the way. And so I thought, well, that's interesting. It was created by a game designer and artist, Paolo Pedercini, who was founder of the radical game development collective Molleindustria. And what he did was he took a game that was created by the U.S. Department of Defense called America's Army, and he completely inverted the purpose of the game. The game was a state-funded it was a free state-funded tactical shooter that was used as a kind of recruitment tool and public relations, saying, you know, this is the army, you could be a hero and all of that. And instead, what he did was he inverted the content to talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, and he uses the checklist that the Army uses from their post-traumatic stress disorder checklist, and he uses questions in that in tandem with his filming of America's Army to characterize a Army recruit who has post-traumatic stress disorder. It's very simple. There's no dialogue. There's some very interesting, odd and interesting music in it by a Finnish group called Pansonic. And using the desert, essentially the story is a sniper shoots a person, and apparently one assumes that triggers their breakdown. And he starts wandering in the desert, and you go through the deserted army bases and desolate places until you finally end up into the wide open desert, which is a wonderful metaphor for the lack of feeling that the soldier has. It's just very, very smart. It's poetic, it's striking, it's perfectly paced. It's only about 5.5 minutes long, and it makes its point without hitting you over the head, which has always, I think, been a problem with people trying to do political media, is they become polemics. And you end up going, well, you've stacked the deck here. He doesn't do that at all. He uses a very simple plot, very simple character. The only criticism I would have of it is that because it's in a game that is pretty primitive in 2009, you're unable to see the character's face in any extended way. And so you can't show that vacant look on the character's face at times. The film really asks for close-ups of the guy, but he doesn't give it to you because of the limits of the game. But that's a minor quibble to this really, really sharp and affecting and moving political machinima, which I love to put those two words together because you just don't see them very often. I really, really liked this film. I was impressed with it, and I was eager to share it with you to hear what you thought of it. Fire away.
I remember when the US Army game was released, it was very controversial because there were lots of debate about should video games be used as a recruitment tool. And obviously, eventually, it did get released. I can't say I ever played it. But Ricky, I'm glad you mentioned that's the game that was made with it, because I was watching the film. I was thinking, I don't recognize the game that this was made with. So that, it does help them to know. And I feel like that adds something, because that controversy is obviously long forgotten now. But when this film was made, that would have been something very much in the filmmaker's mind, which may have been one of the reasons that he decided to take the game and invert it around.
Yeah.
You mentioned that the game is very primitive by today's standards, and you can't really get a look on the character's face. And I agree that it's a shame that you don't get that vacant look. But on the other hand, it's not really animated that well either, so it kind of works and is also covered, so that could be anyone. And I feel like it's not any specific character. This is something that affects a lot of people, and so not having a distinct look at his face means it's a lot easier to imagine that this could be anyone, rather than, well, that guy looks exactly like however they've designed him. We talk about red versus blue and the helmets making the characters anonymous, and that's done for comedy reasons. But this, again, you don't see his face, so he's kind of anonymous. But it works to tell that this is a very traumatized individual who's been put in this situation, and he's not anyone. He's not a specific character. This could be any soldier that gets recruited. So this could be you if you decide to sign up. And you're put in a situation that is very difficult. And of course, being a soldier, there's no way to predict what you're going to face. So I kind of liked that. But yeah, it's just there's a bit where you got the mask covering it there, and then the helmet covers his face. You just see his eyes. Having more animation around his eyes would have been good, but at the same time, it still worked for me.
Yeah, like I said, it was minor. It was a minor issue, and I take your point.
Yeah. I thought it was a very powerful film. It's not one that I would want to ask any soldiers, is this accurate? Because I wouldn't want to traumatize anyone. But from what I my understanding of soldiers who have seen combat and come home with a lot of PTSD and other issues, this is a fairly accurate portrayal of some of the things that they go through. There's some very interesting shots, like the shot where it's the sniper scope. I think the filmmaker spent a lot of time making that feel very natural, because oftentimes when you're doing those kind of shots in games, just to play it, you've got the mouse or the controller, and it doesn't necessarily feel like what you'd expect, because he's very carefully closing and he kind of goes a little too far and he moves back and he's taking his time to line up the shot perfectly. Whereas if you're just playing the game, you would move it and then you take the shot and maybe you hit, maybe you miss, but there's just something about the way the camera moves that makes it feel more like more natural, as in camera is actually looking down a real scope at the target.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of time is spent by the filmmaker to make that feel real. And it also adds to the trauma, because this character is very carefully lining up the shot. He knows that that's a real person out there, so he's taking his time to aim at, and then he takes the shot and the screen goes blank, and that's when the trauma hits him, and it kind of sets off the message behind the film. So I feel like taking that slow moment of it adds more to it. So I was very impressed by that too. So yeah, this is an excellent pick, Ricky. I think I saw it. I do remember seeing it a long time ago. I couldn't tell you where or how, but I do remember watching it before. So it's nice to see it again, and it's a very thought-provoking film.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Well, I've got a bunch of thoughts, as you would expect. Actually, though, I started off looking a little bit at the artist that's created it. But before I get to that, let me just say there's two different versions of this I found. So obviously, Ricky, you've given us the Internet Archive version, and that's the one I originally viewed. But there is also on Paolo's YouTube channel a version of this without the credits. My advice is watch the credits of it too, because I think that's important in the context of what this is actually about. All he's done is taken those credits in order to shorten it a little bit and put the credits in the description, but it loses a little something in having done that. I
just add, the reason they probably did that is at the time, YouTube had very tight time restrictions on the videos you could upload.
2013, I think, or it's been uploaded a lot more recently than when it was released in 2000.
Okay. But even in 2013, they were still very picky about how long you could.
Were they? Well, I mean, yeah, I thought 15 minutes there was.
I can't remember specifically. I just remember they were. Anyway, carry on. Sorry.
Well, I think it's quite interesting that he's done that, but like I said, I think he's lost a little bit, or there's a little bit of context missing in just having done that. And I'll come back to that because I think it's kind of relevant. So this is, I'd have said Pedercini. He's an Italian-born artist, and he's a game designer, and he's an educator. And as I understand it, he's now based in Pittsburgh, where he's an associate professor of art at Carnegie Mellon. Super ironically, I was reading some background material on his work, and he studied media under Michael Nietzsche of the Machinima reader infamy. And there's some comments on some of the things that he talks to various journalists and what have you about some of his work, where he's basically explaining he didn't have a clue what Michael was talking about when he was discussing performative machinima, which I think is really, really quite funny.
Yes.
And somewhat ironic in the context of us looking at this now. So he's actually been creating this kind of work since 2003, and he's basically, he's produced politically engaged games and digital artworks under that name that you identified, Ricky, Molleindustria. or however one pronounces that. I'm sorry, I butchered that, I think. What his work does is explores the relationship between kind of electronic entertainment and ideology. And his games really address things like labor and alienation and kind of corporate exploitation and militarism. Religion, I think, is another theme. Consumer technology is another one. Environmental crises and what have you. And the difficulties associated with all those of political change. I think what distinguishes his practice is that these arguments are built into the rules of the games that he builds, which is an interesting approach. So he's adapting, I believe. I think the game that this was filmed in was actually built using Unreal Engine originally. Was it released in 2003? And I think, as I also read about the game a little bit, it was a game designed to recruit soldiers post 9/11. So it was pitching at people who wanted to respond to that, either in Iraq or Afghanistan or wherever. So that's what he kind of used as his palette, so to speak. Now, he also often appropriates familiar game forms. So things like management simulations and shooters and city builders and these kind of political games. But he alters them so that the underlying ideologies become visible. And basically what he's trying to do is trap the player of a game inside some kind of compromised system. Now, this is a machinima. This is not a game adaptation necessarily. However, I think he's obviously modded it somehow in order to remove some of the mechanics. This particular film, Welcome to the Desert of the Real, belongs to sort of an avant-garde tradition of what's referred to, or what seems to have become referred to as counter gaming. Including things like tactical media and culture jamming, in which artists kind of appropriate military games to challenge the ideologies those games actually promote. So rather than inventing a kind of a fictional representation of warfare, what he's done is use this game, America's Army, to basically empty it of missions and enemies and kind of heroic achievement, and then kind of reconnects its more sort of sanitized military image to the psychological consequences of combat. That's the way he's kind of gone about it. And I think it's actually constructed, as you sort of said, Ricky, by bringing these two institutional products of the US military system together. The images obviously come from that game, but the words, as you said, come from the military version of the PTSD checklist.
Right.
Which, as I understand it, is produced by the Department of Veteran Affairs. So I think what the work's doing is really quite clever. He's asking us to look beyond what the military game makes playable, and he's confronting us with what its rules and representations leave out. In other words, the consequences of having participated in some kind of action. I think what's interesting is the relationship between the materials used and how he's presented them. And that's why I think it's worth looking at the version on the archive, because the credits have a very specific order, which I think demonstrates the significance of how this thing has been put together. And if you're looking at it, what he credits first is the PTSD checklist as the source of the text that he's used in the film, before identifying the game as the source of the images, and then the sound follows that. So that order, I believe, is significant. And I think when you think about that, that kind of reflects the structure of kind of what you're seeing, because it's the checklist that's really the driving force for what you're looking at. The game kind of provides the visual material, but it's these kind of clinical questions that determine how that material is interpreted. I mean, it's clearly how we selected it, but it's also how we interpret it as we're kind of going through it. And essentially, you're looking at the same blank kind of desert scenes, but each time you get another little page of text, it makes you feel a little bit different about what it is you're looking at just as a
Right.
desert scene, which is
And the
quite,
film also progresses towards just blank desert.
yeah,
Initially, you have buildings and things like that, but then when you finally get to the blank desert with this huge sun, so it's
yeah,
actually stripping away everything.
yeah, that's right. But the words themselves are what drive you to feel colder and colder about it, I think. It's quite
Yeah.
it's quite it's quite a surreal experience, sort of, getting right into it. And I recommend you put a binaural headset on just to sort of really get into the white noise that you hear as well.
Yes.
Um, so, as you sort of said, Damien, the opening, and I think it initially appears to kind of reproduce the, maybe the visual language of a military shooter. We kind of see a bit of a close up of him. And then we look through this sight, as you said, and the crosshairs. And you kind of, you become him in that kind of moment because you go from sort of third person to first person in that kind of view. You don't see him shoot, but you're almost certain that that's what's happened because at the moment that takes place, you're him. But then it goes black just as the shot is fired. It's black. So he's, what he then does, I think, which is interesting. He kind of quite quickly withdraws from this kind of conventional then military viewpoint, and basically the film kind of leaves behind the excitement and the speed and the tactical purpose that you would kind of normally associate with the game. And instead, what you're left then with is this sort of solitary individual soldier kind of moving through this just largely empty, deserted desert
Right.
scape. You see the soldier walking away from a gun that he appears to have left on the ground, and he's walking into the distance. And nothing in the scene really explains exactly what has happened. You kind of think you do, but you don't see any of it really. There's no mission briefing. There's no kind of heroic action. And there's no confirmation that the objective of whatever it is he's there to do has actually been completed. He just simply recedes against this kind of landscape, just kind of gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And I think that's quite, important in the context of what we're talking about. Um, and that's at the point where I think the game becomes no longer this kind of tactical arena, but more of a psychological space.
Yeah.
Where
I
you,
thought that too. In a way, the blackout might be, to
yeah,
your point, the blackout might be a switch from external reality to his internal reality.
yeah, exactly. That's
Yeah.
exactly as I saw it as well. Sort of you then start to sort of feel the closing in of it, don't you? The kind of
Yeah, yeah.
there's a sort of an isolation, a kind of a disorientation, and in the end, you're not really sure whether what you're looking at is him experiencing that world or him remembering it, which I
Yes.
think is
Good
kind
point.
kind of intriguing. I think that if we just talk about these comments, these text moments, I think they're interesting. Really, the first kind of checklist statement that you see talks about repeated disturbing memories, thoughts, images, or dreams of a stressful military experience. Now, what he does really quite cleverly is not illustrate what that bit of text sort of talks about. Not in a literal, not in a literal kind of flashback way. Instead, what he's doing is, he's letting the story behave like a traumatic memory. And these kind of similar images recur: the walking, the emptiness of the dunes, the abandoned buildings, the watchtowers, the doorways, the sun, the relenting sun, if you like, that kind of repeatedly overwhelms the image.
Yeah.
Then these are not kind of presented as parts of a clear narrative. They're disconnected fragments, rather like visual impressions that can't be organized into a kind of a stable account of what might have happened. And that's where the sound design kind of reinforces it. There's no kind of dialogue, there's no explanatory voiceover. In place of that speech, we kind of just hear wind and a sort of sustained wash of sound, almost, and I think that's important too, almost resembling white noise. In places, it becomes more obvious that that's what it is, but it's not necessarily discernible as it starts, really. I think that ambiguity actually is really quite effective, because I think the sound belongs kind of, well, you're not really quite sure. It kind of belongs simultaneously, I think, to the desert and maybe to the soldier's inner mind state as well. And I think as you listen to it, I listened to it without kind of looking at it, and I kind of thought, well, I'm not really sure I'm not really sure whether that's interference or tinnitus, maybe, or, would that be kind of psychic pressure, or is that kind of a residual noise of something that this soldier has experienced that just can't kind of be silenced? It's really cleverly done. I mean, white noise normally masks other sounds, and in a sense, that growing sound of it does drown out other sounds eventually. It kind of fills the space along with that kind of relenting sun. That's what you're left with, that over kind of whelming image of those two things. I think that's how he creates that kind of distance. I think distance between us as a viewer and what's happening with this kind of soldiery. I think that's the clever bit, really, because you're never quite, once you've left that first person view, you're never quite back in that soldier's domain again. He's always moving away from you.
Yeah.
Which, that reflects how other people perceive people that have PTSD, isn't it? There's always that kind of distance.
Yeah.
And that it shifts the relationship we kind of have to the character. I think it's also worth saying that that checklist, every time there's a quote in there, it moves our thoughts about what it is we're seeing every time. And the more you watch it, the more you kind of feel that emotional shift. So every time another quote comes up, you feel more and more dread as to what it is you're going to read and then what will follow it. So for example, the comment trouble falling or staying. Do you have trouble falling or staying asleep? Well, the thing that follows that is a dawn-like landscape where the sun is kind of low on the horizon, suggesting that he's up early because he just can't sleep and he's gone for a little stroll. And then you've got these kind of long, quiet passages that also create this kind of uncertainty between waking and dreaming. And the desert, you might argue, kind of seems real, but also it's very empty and just so repetitive. You're not really sure whether that's part of the dreamscape, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then finally, I think the question about feeling that one's future is somehow to be cut short is basically accompanied by the soldier moving largely, he's going towards a sort of blank horizon. He's kind of walking, but there's no visible destination beyond that desert and the glare of the sun. And progress, therefore, becomes kind of indistinguishable, I suppose, from him disappearing into it. And that is another kind of one of the challenges, is it not? Of, how do you escape this kind of environment?
If it was a Hollywood film, they'd have his buddies pull up in a truck and go, "Hey, are you okay, man? Hey, I think he's out of it. We got to get him some treatment. And they
or
put him in the back, and then they take him
or
away, and there'd be a, you know,
a party.
he struggled for years, but then finally had a family and kids and is doing well today.
And a rock music soundtrack.
Yes. No, 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 no,
Yeah.
no. Yeah. Yeah. So I was very grateful that zero sentimentality was part of
Yeah.
this
Well,
wonderful
yes. I
film.
mean, there isn't. There's no optimism in it. I don't think at all.
No.
I think what he's done, Pedercini, I think he's turned the army's own representational machinery against itself, frankly. I mean,
Yes.
it's a game designed to present military service as kind of controlled and purposeful and
Yeah.
attractive, um, for recruitment purposes, really.
Yeah.
But what this guy's done is presented the things that the game leaves out, which is, the possibility
The effect of all of this.
indeed, but the possibility that military experience continues long after the mission is finished,
Yes,
in
indeed.
in the form of these kind of intrusive memories, the avoidance of issues, sleeplessness, emotional numbness.
Yeah. That's why I think the film is so smart.
It is smart.
It's
Yeah.
because the great mass of machinima, as we've experienced it through history, is just entertainment, and that's fine. I'm not saying that's bad or anything like that, but it's always good to have somebody who's thoughtful and who thinks about, well, what is this game trying to do? Well, they're leaving out, as you point out, the effects of all of this so-called heroism on long after they finish the war. And that's a very smart thing to do with something like Machinima. I think that's great.
I think he's done it really very well. And I mean, I think the only other thing really I would say is the fact that you've both talked about emotion and that you couldn't see it in the character's face. I don't think he ever intended to show it, even if the character was able to give over the sense of emotion. I think the point isn't about the emotion of the soldier. I think it's about the distance and the
I think you're
state of mind.
misunderstanding me, what I said. I didn't say we needed a close-up to show emotion. We needed a close-up to show no emotion.
Right. Okay. Yeah, well, I think he's achieved it without a close-up.
I understand that. I just wanted to clarify my point.
Thank you. Yeah, perfectly. Well, it's not a lone piece of work in doing what it's doing. I mean, I think you can compare it to folks like Joe DeLappe's Dead in Iraq, which was also performed in America's Army over
Right.
a kind of an extended period of time. I think we've talked about that before. And in that particular artwork, Joe basically went into the game but wouldn't fight. Instead, he basically typed the names and the details of all the soldiers that were killed in Iraq into its kind of communication system. And these kinds of and we've also talked about other machinima that looks at the consequences of war in different ways. I mean, these function as kind of counter propaganda, really, and they're not easy watches, I would suggest, if they're played in. I'd say you've got to be in a reasonable state of mind to sort of watch this and not be affected by it, really. But yeah. It's a really interesting pick. I'm really glad you brought it to us. I think it's a timely discussion of yet another example of some very well done machinima.
Yeah, I think so too.
Irrespective that the game's been long since superseded by greater cinematic qualities.
I actually think that it might be a good film to remake.
You could be right, yeah.
I know you guys argue for the anonymity of it, but I think it would be interesting to remake it in a more visual style so that for one thing, the sniping experience is, while it's effective, it's not the best thing to initiate a traumatic breakdown. Because part of the reason is the sniper is far away from the victim. And so the impact of the victim dying is not as significant as, say, blowing, a group of people up or cutting down a bunch of people with a massive gun. That sort of thing might be more a better way to show a breakdown scenario. And you could do that with a modern game.
Which game would you choose?
I would do it in Unreal Engine or and recreate everything from scratch. For one thing, the desert could be much more varied and realistic. Sinking into the sand would be a wonderful metaphor for him sinking into some emotional state. He might come across dead body with no reaction to it, or groups of dead bodies. The atmosphere and sky could be more dynamic, and it might even have a time change from daylight to sunset or night or something like that. Anyway, would you give you an opportunity to revisit not so much the concept, but the craft of making the story?
Yeah.
Point.
But Tracy, when you asked what game, I was going to say something like Call of Duty, but then when Ricky explained why he would go with Unreal, I think, actually, that's the better choice. I thought Call of Duty, because it's got all the soldier stuff in. I'm pretty sure that those games are put out as a recruitment tool to try and show war's cool, look, you can be a big hero and all of that. But I think having the control that something like Unreal would offer to change the time of day and things like that, so you can show him just standing there and time passes. You can't do that in Call of Duty because it's all fixed and look as cinematic as possible. But something where you get maximum control. So I'd agree with you for that.
Yeah, you'd lose that irony of creating a counter machinima inside of us of a game that whose motive was entirely different. But I think that would be okay because the message is more important than that irony, and the irony is long lost.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Call of Duty. I mean, John McInnes worked on that with military people, did he not? On the latest version.
I don't know. Probably.
Yeah. Well, okay. Great discussion. Thank you very much for bringing to this table.
Yes, indeed.
It's a really fascinating thing to talk through and reflect upon. Audience, what would you put this one to? What would you remake this particular filming? To Ricky's point, Damien's point. Comments would be very welcome. That's it for this week. Hope you enjoyed our discussion. Thank you to Damien and Ricky, and we'll see you next week.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Bye.